So, my sister and husband have been sleeping with each other. I just found out the news and I am absolutely beside myself. But hey, I'm not gonna sit back, lay down, and let this all just blow by. I'm going for revenge, and I'm going to make sure my sister and husband learn a lesson. My sister Jane and I were close growing up. Maybe that was because I didn't have any other female siblings, or that she was always someone with whom I had so much in common with. But either way, I considered her my best friend, and it didn't matter that I was the older sister by 2 years. When I met Brad, Jane was the first to know. I was in college by then in New York, and he was studying architecture, and I was studying culinary arts. He'd asked me out when we were sophomores after we hung out a couple times. I would just text Jenna telling her everything, from how Brad took me out on some fancy date, how we would hold hands as we walked on the street, and, well, how we would have picnics in the park. I even showed her tons of pictures of us together. I told her about the first time we even hooked up, and I remembered the both of us squealing happily. Well, it was mostly me, though if I was being frank. We had FaceTime then. A few weeks before graduation, Brad proposed to me, and I couldn't say how happy I was. It was surprising and so romantic. He did it on a beach in New Jersey where we went to spend the weekend on Valentine's Day, and I still remember everybody cheering and clapping. I will never forget that. After we graduated, I took him home with me to meet my parents, who could not make it to the graduation party. Everyone at home loved him. Brad was nice, polite, and such a gentleman. Jane approved of him so much that she would always want to hang out with us. I was glad that they were getting along and were becoming friends because normally, Jane did not approve of any of my boyfriends. I was glad when she was okay with Brad, at least that's what I thought. After an engagement party where his parents and I met, we began to plan for the wedding. We wanted something small, something nature-like. We opted for a garden wedding with just a few close acquaintances. The ceremony was beautiful and so fairy tale-like, though I did notice Brad was acting a bit nervous and so was Jane, but I didn't think much of it. Instead, I found it cute, because I thought that Jane was feeling emotional that I was leaving our home forever, and Brad was just excited to have me as his wife. Thinking about it now, I realize just how blind I was. Before we tied the knot, Brad and I had saved up for a home in Florida, my home state where also my family resided. It was a 4-bedroom bungalow with a lovely backyard that I imagined having barbecues in. My life felt perfect. I was with a handsome, kind man who loved me, and I had a loving family too. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, and brother-in-law were nice and supportive, and of course there was my sister, my best friend. A year later, I got pregnant, and of course the first person I told was Jane. I thought she'd be as excited as I was because I was screaming as I told her when she came to visit, but she looked more shocked than excited. "Wait, when did this happen?" she asked. At first, I was confused by the question, and I think she noticed that because she laughed right after and told me that she was just shocked and excited, and the question came unexpectedly. Again, I was too excited to ponder on that for too long, and Brad was as excited as I was, and we anticipated the birth of our child. After 9 months, we had our bundle of joy, a bouncing baby boy, that we named Isaac. I couldn't have asked for a better life. I was so content. Even if Brad was the breadwinner of the family, I had the baking business that kept me going. I supplied little bakeries and cafes around the town from my kitchen. Jane would visit me more often, sometimes even when it was only Bradley and the baby at home. And I was grateful because she would overlook Isaac when Brad was not here or tired. At least, that's what I thought. There's a saying that betrayal hurts when it's from the ones you don't expect. The ones, that you trust the most. When my son turned 2, I decided to have a girls' night out. Just Jenna and me. She'd been really busy lately with work and school, even if she did an online course. I missed hanging out with her because she did not visit very often anymore, which sucked. After all, I was at home more since Isaac was born. Gladly, Jane agreed to my invitation, and after dropping Isaac and my parents and telling Brad not to wait up for me, I went to the club with my sister. First, driving to our parents' house and picking her up, then leaving. I still don't know what exactly or how exactly it happened, but when it did, Jane could not stop talking. I've always known my sister to have a low alcohol tolerance, and I didn't like her drinking too much. But I planned that I would not drink so much as I could drive us both home. If and when she got drunk, and she did get drunk, and that's how it happened. Here's how it started. Jenna starts talking first. She talked about the gossip that she's heard at work, and she's working in a boutique. She talked about her boyfriend, and then she talks about Brad. And she told me everything, and my goodness, I don't think a word could ever be made to describe the feeling that washed over me when she told me of the affair she was having. Having, because it was still ongoing, with my husband. Yeah, my perfect husband. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, or I didn't hear it well, but Jane was drunk as duck, and the area of the club where we were at wasn't even loud, barely any music, and I was even a little tipsy, so yeah, it was not a joke. My sister, my best friend in the whole wide world, the person I told everything about who betrayed me and was having a continuous affair with my husband. Like, how could she even look at me in the face when we saw each other? How could she laugh with me, joke, and act normal when she knew she was sleeping with my husband behind my back? Having an affair with the father of my child, huh? Tears stung my eyes as I watched her get wasted and kept talking. She told me that the affair had begun a day before my wedding day, and I felt my heart sink. She told me that she'd always liked Brad ever since she saw the photos of him, and they'd secretly been texting this whole time. Jane told me the first time was an accident. She was tipsy and had ventured into his room, because we all lodged in a hotel to celebrate our bachelorette and bachelor party, respectively. So while I was sleeping with my other girlfriends in one room, my sister makes her way into Brad's room and slept with him. As I sat there immobile and listening to this, I realized that not once did Jane feel remorse over what she's done. She simply talked on and on and on, occasionally laughing and saying, "Darn, it's crazy if OP found out." Well, I still just could not understand because, well, I thought Brad loved me. I thought he was happy with me and the little family that we've planned. I tried to be the perfect wife to him and the best sister to Jane, so I wondered why they would do this to me. I couldn't say anything. I didn't even know what to say. I felt like my life was simply over. My heart had shattered into a million and millions of pieces, and I had paid for the drinks earlier, so I just stood up and left. I left her there and dragged myself home. I sincerely don't know what to do or where to start. I really just want to catch them in the act. Maybe it'll clear up everything and all this doubt that I feel. Well, if anyone's reading this, please, can you shoot me some advice on how to catch them? Thanks, guys. What's up, everybody? Mr. Edito here. So yeah, this story's going to be an absolute wild ride. Just so you know, there is 6, and I'll repeat that, 6 jammed-packed updates. I found every single one. Let's jump into update 1. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, take a second right now, click that subscribe button, and here is your update. I can't believe my story garnered this much attention. I'm extremely thankful for all your support and comments. I know some of you said I already knew the truth and catching them in the act will just hurt me more, but I really need to see it for myself. My life is in shambles right now. I'm a shadow of myself, and even my so-called husband can see it. Anyways, I finally came up with a plan. Knowing that my sister is a horrible drunk and she has amnesia after a night of heavy drinking, I made a plan to catch her and my husband in bed. That day, I called her and asked if she could help me babysit my toddler as my husband isn't, well, the best at child care. And I needed to run a few errands. She conceded and came over and agreed. I pretended that all was well, exchanged the pleasantries with her as usual, after which I drove my car just a few miles away from the home. After driving for 20 minutes, I turned back to the house. On one hand, I was hoping my sister was just spewing random things while she was drunk, but a larger part of me knew she was telling the truth. I returned home and parked a distance away from the home and walked inside. I opened the door and walked stealthily into the house. As I walked through the door, I heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was all in my head because I'd already expected the worst, but as I walked in, the noise became louder. I heard my husband's voice, followed by my sister's little giggles, loud and clear. Feeling uneasy, I climbed up those staircase one step at a time, with my heart jam-packed racing. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could see into the bedroom cracked door. At that moment, my worst fears were confirmed. I saw my sister and husband in bed together, their bodies intertwined. I stood frozen in shock for what felt like an eternity. Well, it was probably just a few seconds. Finally, I found it inside of me, that strength to speak. Brad? Jane? What's going on here? Those two questions are the hardest I've ever uttered. I was shaking my feet, feeling both hot and cold simultaneously. I know I expected it, but catching them in the act was a whole new, different ballgame entirely. The betrayal was more than I could even handle. At this point, Brad and Jane quickly jump apart. Their faces red with embarrassment, more like only Brad, though. His face was really red. "Baby, I can explain," Brad said with his voice trembling. Jane, on the other hand, just laid in bed completely unbothered. I'll never forget how smug she looked at that point. I remember in high school, my friends always told me that she stole and slept with her boyfriends. But I didn't believe it because she is my sister. Why would she do such a thing to people? Well, at the moment, I realized that everything they said was absolutely the truth. Well, I even stopped talking to those people because they were defaming my sister. That goes to show how much I loved her. I didn't want to hear whatever excuses Brad had, so I turned and ran out of that room, tears strolling down my face, and I finally confirmed my worst fears possible. My husband and my sister, the two people I trusted the most, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Before leaving the house, I didn't forget to carry my child along with me. Update number 2. Once again, thank everybody for the massive support. I still can't believe the attention I'm getting. So many of you have been wondering where I went and who I was staying with. Leaving the house, I put a call through to one of my friends. I've asked if I could stay over just for a couple of days. She was shocked and asked me why. I told her it was a long story. Fortunately for me, she allowed my child and me to stay over. Within those few days, I couldn't eat or sleep. I couldn't bear to think about my husband talking more about seeing him. He had called multiple times, even texting me, more times than I could count, but I needed some space. Thank heavens for my friend who took care of me and my child, as I could barely take care of myself. After days of moping around and deciding to confide in my friend, she asked me to talk and take my time to heal, as she was there for me all through the entire process. Weeks went by, and I decided to reach out to Brad. Since I needed to go back to pick up a few things I needed from the house, we decided to meet up at the home. So, I walked into the house and found it all messed up with beer cans, bottles, and takeout packs littered amongst the floor, sink, countertops, tables, and chairs. Seeing me walk in, Brad broke into tears. He begged me, apologized, even mumbled on, but I wasn't listening. I just kept reliving the day that my world was shattered over and over. I didn't even know when I started crying. I stood there with him kneeling and we cried together. I still couldn't believe everything that happened. My perfect life, my model family went just like that. I wondered if it was some kind of dream that everything happened so fast. Some kind of nightmare. When a few things calmed down and we both stopped crying, Brad starts to try to explain himself. Emphasis on try because I wasn't buying it. I could not possibly imagine what he would say. What was there to say or explain? Initially, I decided that I didn't want to hear him explain. I just wanted answers from his end, and I asked him to tell me everything. Has he liked her before? Did he love her? I wanted to know. I mean, out of every girl there was to cheat on with me, he chose my sister? That's just sickening. Brad said that Jane was the one to reach out to him first. She looked for him on Instagram and texted him there. She was supposedly very flirtatious and soon confessed her feelings. Brad said that he was shocked at first and did remind her that, she was his fiance's sister, but Jane was persistent and even started to send him some illicit photos. He said he wanted to tell me about it, but he couldn't, and this alone made me slap him. Did this mean all the time we sat close to each other in the train or in joint class and he was texting her? And he couldn't show me. Why? I still didn't understand and was very angry. I asked him to continue and he was very embarrassed. He said that he didn't want the affair to continue, but Jane was always seducing him, especially when she came over. After I listened, I became more and more hurt by everything. They had sex in my house, on my matrimonial bed. My sister and my husband. Well, tears were flowing down my cheeks as I wept again, and I started to rethink everything I overlooked and how it all made sense now. I then asked him my burning question, do you love her? When I saw that he pondered too long upon the question, I stood up and walked away to the living room, and he followed behind like a lost puppy. That day, I packed the rest of my things, took my son in my car, and went to my parents' house. My parents have been trying to reach me, but I kept shutting them out. I hadn't even entered the home before I broke down in tears. They were shocked, as they've never seen me so hysterical before. They ushered me inside to sit, and my dad carried my son to play and left my mom and me to talk. I leaned on her shoulders and cried while telling her all that had happened. My mom was so shocked that she actually started shouting. The shout alerted my father, and he came a-running and asking what happened. My mom explains everything, and to say my parents were shocked is an absolute understatement. They couldn't believe that their own daughter, my younger sister, had been sleeping with their son-in-law, my husband. They kept asking, is it our Jane? Jane, your sister? Over and over again, like some broken record. Before my mother broke down in tears, she said she was very disappointed and she kept on questioning and her upbringing. On the other hand, I kept wondering if I've done something to her to make her do something to me like this. I kept wondering why. Like, isn't this hate? It'd only be hate or perhaps something else that would drive her to do this. That would drive Brad to betray me. The next day, the news had already reached my parents and in-laws, and my own parents had called them to inform them of what happened. They were as horrified and shocked as I was and everyone else. Brad kept trying to call me. In his words, he wanted to, quote, sort things out. But I wasn't in the least bit interested. The worst part was my so-called sister did not bother to come up to explain anything. She didn't come home, and my parents called and left her a ton of messages, but of course, she never replied. After a couple of days of not picking up or returning anybody's phone calls, I guess Jane decides to text that everyone should stop bothering her. At this point, I was absolutely furious, to say the least. I couldn't imagine this at all. I couldn't see how she could have the guts to be this bold, with no feeling or remorse or anything. I cried myself to sleep every night over this, and I still couldn't believe it. Every day I'd wake up and wish that it was all some kind of dream, some kind of nightmare, and it wasn't true, and every day I would wake up disappointed. My parents were very supportive during this time, and my mom would help me with Isaac, and my father would always be there to give me hope and console me. One time, when I didn't stop crying, my father got frustrated and so sad that he left the house and went straight to Brad, just to beat him up. Thankfully, Brad did not open the door, and of course he would not dare call the police on my father, so he just stayed there in the house, cowardly taking in every insult my father spewed at him. My parents and parents-in-laws have been more than helpful and supportive during these hard times. I decided to divorce Brad, and my parents decided to hold a dinner/family meeting with both Brad and his parents to talk about it. Well, I've made up my mind. There's no turning back. I will update you on exactly how this goes. Update 3. Some of you asked why my parents want to call a meeting, and it seems like they don't want a divorce to happen. Well, my parents are very good Christians who don't believe in divorce. They believe there's a solution to everything. Everybody showed up early for the meeting except for Jane. Eventually she showed. She walked in, looked me over, and walked away, winking at Brad, who sat there trying to play with my son. I was livid, and it didn't take me long before I lunged at her. The nerve of this woman. It was a while before we got separated, but we each did sustain some injuries. Jane was screaming that I had touched her and she would call the cops. My mom walked up to her and silenced her with a firm slap. But that didn't stop her. She kept talking and told me that she didn't care about this whole issue if I even got hurt or not. Why are you the one who gets married and gets to have a family? Huh? Why? She screamed in front of everyone that was present. She told me that she and Brad were in love with each other and I should just accept it. I was honestly too shocked at this moment to even reply. I was very convinced that she was sick or not okay in the head. What the heck was she saying, I wondered. After everything calmed down, I told Brad that we needed to talk and we went into an empty room. At that point, I decided to divorce my husband. The betrayal was more than I could handle. I talked to him and Kent and just reminisced about our good days. From how we met to our date nights, the proposal, the wedding, the honeymoon, and to our childbirth journey. I laughed sadly and asked him how did it turn into this? How could he not say anything? I guess he was just a loss for words. Tears started to stream down my face as I sat across from my husband, and I knew what I needed to say, but the words would not come out. Finally, I took a deep breath and blurted out the truth. I want a divorce. His face fell and his eyes filled with tears. What? Why? He said that we could work things out, and he said he'd be ready to make sacrifices, make numerous promises, but I wasn't buying one of them. I asked him to imagine if I was sleeping with his brother. How would he feel? At that point, he was at a loss for words, but still kept on trying to convince me, but I've given up everything of hope. The whole fiasco was too much for my mental health, and my son was suffering from it as well. So, after telling him this, I walked out of the room. I could hear cries of anguish as I walked away, but there's no going back for me anymore. I walked up into the living room and told everybody my decision. I wanted a divorce from Brad. I didn't care. I didn't want to hear anything. I just walked up to Jane and told her, you know what, sis? You can have him. I picked up my son and went directly upstairs. From upstairs, I could hear shouts and cries, and the most prominent of all was Jane's voice. She sounded ecstatic. Update number 4. Hey guys, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really plan to update anymore, but my thinking of everything was going to end that night was a big joke. After Jane left that day, she blocked everyone from reaching her. All social media's everything. She still kept reaching out to Brad, and in a bid to convince me that he was not having anything to do with her anymore, he sent me all her messages, but I was too far gone. I didn't care. Weeks passed, and Jane reached out to me. She asked me to come over to her house. Well, I guess I decided to go. Getting to her house, I saw the same scene as I went to the house to talk to Brad. Bottles and takeout packs are thrown amongst the place. Jane confessed to me that she'd always felt like the black sheep of the family. She said that at a point she even felt that she was adopted. Well, her brother and I'd always been the golden goose child. Successful, happy, and living their best life. But Jane felt different. See, she was sexually assaulted by a family member who came over for the holidays, and she never told anyone about it. This led to her finding it hard to keep up with her grades, and I remember Jane used to be one of the brightest minds in her class. But all of a sudden, she starts failing and walking with wrong crowds. As for me, I was in over my head. I called her my best friend, but truth be told, I was self-centered. The lack of attention, just coupled with the same incident, caused her to begin taking drugs. The drugs made her feel happy and feel loved. She struggled with addiction, depression, and general sense of homelessness. Well, I sympathized with her and forgave her. However, even if I could forgive her, I could not forgive Brad. I left her house that day and planned to come over again the following day. Update number 5. The majority of you in the comment section after my last update were shocked that I forgave Jan. Yes, I did. As I said, I grew up in a Christian home, and the Bible asks to forgive. That was the hardest thing I've ever had to do anyways. I'm updating this because Jane is dead. Yeah, she's dead. She decided to take her own. I'm still in shock as I write this, and this is what happened. A few weeks after our heart-to-heart, Jane called me and told me that she was planning to hurt herself and she just can't do it anymore. She said she couldn't take the shame and pain, and I asked her to calm down and think it through. I called for my parents in a frenzy and told them what Jane said, and we hurriedly went to her house in a bid to stop her. I loved my sister, but I didn't understand why she would want to do something so extreme. I kept on talking to her and trying to convince her maybe we should talk to someone, a therapist, counselor, or they could also help you walk through your feelings. But Jane was not interested in her therapy. She'd already made up her mind. She told me how she'd spent weeks researching ways to do it, and she had a plan. I didn't know what to do. I was torn between wanting to help my sister and feeling angry that she would even consider something so drastic. I tried to convince her to talk to their parents or seek professional help, but Jane was stubborn. Fortunately, our parents were there and could hear her. They also tried convincing her, but she wasn't ready to listen. I just want to leave this world. I'm tired of the pain, the ridicule, the insults. I just want to go somewhere where I can get peace. I didn't know how to respond to that. I felt helpless and frustrated, but I also knew that Jane was stubborn. Our only chance of stopping her was getting her help fast. I kept calling her and asking for her location. Fortunately, she was willing to disclose her location. However, we were in a little too late. I watched as my sister staged her death. Well, she did it by driving her car off a cliff into the ocean. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched emergency responders rush to the scene. I felt completely helpless, and my dad was trying to be strong, but my mom, she was beside herself. I couldn't even console myself, thus I was not in the right frame of mind to even console my mother. The rescuers searched for the body, but it was nowhere to be found. I kept thinking of how I'd missed those last few moments with her. I felt depressed all over again. The entire household was somber. Days passed, and the body still not recovered. This is both good and bad news, as our surrounding waters were filled with carnivorous sea animals. We finally decided to bury an empty casket. But those weeks were absolute madness, and for weeks I lived in a state of constant worry. I checked the news obsessively, waiting for a word of Jane's body being found, but there was nothing. No mention of any missing person or body washing up at shores. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. There was one final update that was added to the comment section a little while after Update 5, and I just want you guys to strap in your seatbelts because you are not going to expect this twist. I have shocking news for y'all, but thank you everybody for your condolences. I'm sorry I couldn't reply to them sooner, but I needed time off social media. This new update is going to shock you, I promise you that. I mean, it shocked me. Months had gone by, and I began to think that maybe Jane was definitely gone for good. Or maybe, by some mix of fate, she was living a new life somewhere free from the burden of her old one. But then one day, I received a phone call. It was Jane. Her words were, "I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking." I was so mad I couldn't believe that my sister would put our family through such pain and trauma. But at the same time, I felt relieved that Jane was still out there. We talked for hours, and Jane explained that she had faked her death and that she needed to disappear because she felt ashamed for what she's done. Our town was small and everybody knew everyone. She said she met somebody and she realized that faking her death was not the answer. She still had problems, but she was willing to work on them. And with her new man's help, she began to do just that. It wasn't an easy road, but I was glad to have my sister back. Her man, my parents, and I worked together to get Jane to the help she needs. And slowly but surely, she started to heal. I just want to thank everybody who was here for me throughout this entire journey, all the comment sections, all the updates. Thank you so much. Your words of encouragement have helped me overcome this grief and sadness. And I decided to give my husband a second chance. Yeah, you heard that right. And though it's going to be a very rough journey with uncomfortable ups and downs, we're going to therapy and working it out one session at a time. Sometimes I can still picture the image of my sister and husband in bed, and even fight with my husband over it. But I guess it's just part of the process of healing. Alright guys, so I just have one question about this crazy story. If you were in OP's position, and everything that you went through, at the end of the story when you found out that she took her cheating husband back, I want to know, was that the right decision, and what would you have done if you were in her shoes? Guys, drop your comments down below. Thank you so much for joining me on today's story. I hope you did enjoy it, and if you did, consider subscribing. Have an amazing day, and I will see you guys in the next one.